Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology of August 2021, so I hope you join me for that. First off, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons who make all of these videos possible. If you would like to become a patron, please go to patreon.com/NinaGriffin. And if you become a patron, you get access to videos early before the rest of the world gets access, as well as in the higher tiers, access to videos that only patrons ever get to see. At the highest tier, you also get access to my monthly Q&A regarding astrology and magic. All right, so let's get started. First off, let's do a quick recap of July. Now, July was an interesting month astrologically because in many ways it felt like there was a lot of repression and a lot of control occurring in reaction to chaos and disorder. Now remember, we were kind of seeing that confrontation between Saturn and Uranus. Jupiter is also in the mix. So there was this sense that disorderliness, that disorder of any kind would not be tolerated, and the screws were getting tightened. One of the things that we saw, which is very typical for the Saturn-Uranus square, is that COVID was making a resurgence in a lot of areas. So this, of course, required more boundaries and limitations, which, as you can imagine, was a bitter pill to swallow for many people. Now, even in the US, we've seen a lot of people who previously were anti-vaccine or they didn't really speak about vaccines because of political reasons and fear of political blowback, were now encouraging people to get vaccinated, right, in light of this resurgence of COVID. So it's kind of like suddenly everybody became Saturn. Everybody started to embody Saturn in July. Now, the other thing that I predicted last month, which unfortunately came true, is that it would be an extremely hot month in many locations, and the risk of fires was highly elevated. So August is still going to be tough in that regard. It's going to be a little bit better toward the end. So I am hopeful that we have a light at the end of the tunnel that is not just an oncoming train. The first week of August is pretty active. Right away, August 1st, we get Mercury's superior conjunction with the Sun at 9 degrees Leo. Now, the superior conjunction is when Mercury is direct and conjoins the Sun, which starts a new cycle for Mercury until the next superior conjunction, which will be November 29th of this year. Because it's happening in Leo, this cycle will be very much focused on rulership, government, and displays of power, because Leo is the royal sign. Now, because the Sun is in his domicile here in Leo and receives Mercury, a lot can get accomplished in these realms of government and rulership, whether that's on the personal level or on the state level. Now, starting now, Mercury is going to be occidental of the Sun. Mercury will rise after the Sun. So at this time, the king is leading again, right? So the king is sort of in charge with people in ancillary roles symbolized by Mercury, whether they're advisors, helpers, ministers, people in other branches of government are kind of following the king's lead instead of trying to get ahead of the king and sort of run things on their own, which is what we see when Mercury is oriental and rising before the Sun. Now, on that same day, Mercury and the Sun will oppose Saturn at 10 degrees Leo and 10 degrees Aquarius. Really, what we're going to see are reality checks and restrictions that characterize this cycle, right? Saturn in Aquarius is in the sign of public infrastructure and public works, so there is a sense that things must be rebuilt now, but it's not going to be easy to get that consensus, which is why Mercury and Sun are in the opposition to Saturn. Certainly, I think in the US political negotiations around infrastructure will be very intense and lengthy due to the fixed signs being involved. When the fixed signs are in place, you will see that nobody really wants to move from their position or compromise. Now, at the same time, whenever the Sun and Saturn are opposite, like they are now, Saturn is the closest to the Earth that he gets in that cycle. So this means that Saturn is really going to be making us focus on material and earthly matters, as opposed to sort of high-level abstract things. So we're really going to be looking at the nitty-gritty, the details of infrastructure. What does it mean to have a functioning society and functioning physical and other types of networks to help people live their lives? Having the Sun and Mercury activating that Saturn-Uranus square is going to give us our third, or in some places fourth, COVID wave, similar to the 1918 flu, when every time that the Sun made a hard aspect to the Saturn-Uranus opposition that was going on at the time, a new wave of the flu emerged. So I think that's something we'll definitely see this summer. Now, this is all tied into something going on August 5th, which is Mercury is as far distant from the Earth as possible. It's the opposite situation from Saturn. Where Saturn is now focused on material things, Mercury is about these high ideals of kingship, glory, what it means to govern, what it means to be a leader in the international sense, right? So I think there are going to be some real limitations and real checks, I would say, and balances on some people's ability to lead and be number one. I wouldn't be surprised if we got into some pretty tight spots with respect to the US debt ceiling right around now, since it expires I think August 1st. At the end of this week, August 6th, the Sun will also square Uranus at 14 Leo, 14 Taurus. So again, that first week of August is just heavily activating the Saturn-Uranus square, which is not only about COVID, but it's also about this year's sort of conflict and negotiation between the extremes of oppression and anarchy, right? As I have said so many times, Saturn square Uranus, they're really two extremes, right? You don't want to live at either of them. Saturn is extreme oppression, while Uranus is total anarchy with no rules and no accountability. And whenever these two planets come into hard aspect, we always get a negotiation on where on that spectrum between these two extremes we are going to land. Nothing is permanent, of course. It's just an opportunity to put this particular discussion into play. And that's what we are doing this year. So when the Sun activates it, this discussion again and again comes up. Now, the second week of August, August 8th, we have a new moon at 16 degrees Leo. This new moon conjoins Mercury on one side and opposes Saturn on the other side. So the theme for the next 2 weeks, until really the third week of August, will be protracted and intense pressure and conflict, with neither side really wanting to give in. Now, the Sun rules the new moon, or this new moon, so the theme, again, will be around rulership and authority and challenges to that authority. The other thing that Leo has to do with, because it's a royal sign, it has to do with credit and reputation. Credit could be financial, but also generally credit. Are you credit worthy, right? And so I think we're going to, again, get into some interesting discussion around debt and around the US's debt rating. August 9th, Mercury will have his evening rise, where he comes out of the Sun's beams behind the Sun, occidental of the Sun. This is the moment known as phasis, or appearance in Greek, and it's a very potent moment for a planet. New information comes out, deals can get made, kids start going back to school in large numbers. Certainly many schools are planning a full in-person return. So I think that we are going to start seeing some kind of compromise or resolution to financial matters in the second week of August. August 10th, Mercury will oppose Jupiter at 28 Aquarius, and this is really kind of a major aspect to Jupiter this month, right? There's this desire to spend money on the public good, which is Jupiter in Aquarius, but it runs up against the business community, the financial community, the banks, and just general questions of, okay, how do we pay for this, right? Certainly, I think we'll have some negative media stories about public infrastructure, and we could also see a highly charged legal decision at this time, which again has to do with the public good, with rulership, with governing, and so on. Now, August 11th, Mercury will enter Virgo. He is in his domicile and exaltation in Virgo. And so again, kids are coming back to school now, and Mercury goes into his home, into his exaltation, where he is happiest. I think that around this time, we might see big medical or biomedical advancements happening. We could get, for example, news from the FDA about the COVID vaccine. Either they're doing their full approval at this time or approval of a kid's vaccine, that kind of thing. The weather, too, could cool down for a little bit since Virgo is a cold and dry sign, but there are still chances of fire because it is a dry sign. So it's not like it went into Scorpio or something where it's cold and moist and very detrimental to fiery conditions. Now, the third week of August, August 15th, Venus will enter Libra. Now, she is in her domicile here. And even though she is a nocturnal planet, so she prefers being in a feminine sign, she prefers being in Taurus, she still loves being in Libra, a masculine or diurnal sign. She is particularly focused on the arts here and on verbal arts. Certainly things are very cerebral or so for the next month. Libra is ruled by Venus, but the exaltation of Saturn. And so I could imagine that we start seeing things like vaccine passports and governments and different authorities generally weighing, because it is Libra, the balance of who is worthy to be social or to enter different kinds of events or establishments and enjoy those Venusian pleasures. August 18th, Mercury will conjoin Mars at 12 degrees Virgo. And this is a pretty incendiary combination. I think it helps that it's happening in Virgo, but it's still going to be felt. I think we will see some protests, maybe even riots or conflicts, particularly around schools and around kids and around medical issues as well. I think in terms of weather, we will also see hot and dry winds that exacerbate fire risk at this time. August 19th, there's kind of a similar theme in terms of weather. The Sun will oppose Jupiter at 27 Aquarius, and this combination often brings about thunderstorms, especially in the summer, so in the northern hemisphere. In winter, if you're looking at the southern hemisphere, it tends to certainly bring moisture, but it's more in the form of, freezing rain, snow, that kind of stuff. Now, because the Sun is opposite Jupiter, it means that Jupiter is the closest to Earth in his cycle. So I think that around this time, we start getting some traction on matters for the public good and infrastructure, and people really start thinking about practical ways that we can make life better for the largest number of people, right? Because Jupiter is so close to Earth, he's required now to be very practical, to be very detail-oriented, and to provide some concrete solutions for how do we make life better for large groups of people. Now, the fourth week is quite active, and I think in many ways it's a very nice week. It's certainly the best week of the month, in my opinion. August 22nd, the Sun will enter Virgo, and so he leaves his domicile. But the plus side is that we no longer will have those visible planets in the fire signs. So I think that will bring temperatures down a bit. There is still high fire risk, but it's less hot, which definitely helps. Same day, August 22nd, there's a full moon at 29 Aquarius. So the moon will conjoin Jupiter in Aquarius, and the ruler of that full moon is Saturn in Aquarius, trine Venus in Libra. It's a very harmonious, very cooperative, collaborative kind of full moon. And I would say that it's really a complete turnabout from where things were 2 weeks ago at the new moon. Where previously we had entrenched resistance, suddenly we have harmony and things moving quite smoothly, although they are still moving in, I would say, a sober and considered manner, right? Nobody's kind of going crazy and signing things left and right, but things are just moving along in a dignified and appropriate manner. So I think that the next 2 weeks, that last week of August, first week of September, we could see some really encouraging progress on matters relating to infrastructure, relating to the public good. August 23rd, Venus will trine Saturn at 8 Libra and 8 Aquarius, and I think it's an opportunity for really good, solid, well thought out legal decisions, and also just generally finding some kind of balance between who gets access to social opportunities. Remember that I talked about how Venus in Libra has to do with weighing who's worthy, who's not worthy, of going to like public events and things like that. And when it's trine Saturn, this tells me that there's definitely a balance, right? This is a strongly received trine. Venus is received by Saturn into his exaltation. So we do get a sense here that things are going to find some kind of momentary stability. Same day, August 23rd, Mars will have his evening setting at 15 Virgo. And so just as emergence from the sun's beams is very strengthening for a planet, so is going back into the beams a diminishment of that planet, right? Just as it's good to emerge, it's bad to go into the beams where the planet is no longer visible. Now, because this is Mars, that might not be a huge problem, right? It could be helpful in keeping heat and fires down. And I think it's also good for keeping Mars-type people down, right? Anyone who's trying to destroy or disrupt aggressively the existing order of things is suddenly going to have the wind taken from their sails around now. We could even see news of people who are Marsy being imprisoned or confined in some way, because that is one of the significations of a planet going under the beams. It's kind of like they lose control of their own fate for that time. So really the theme of this whole last week is, suddenly people are collaborating and behaving almost rationally, and peace is breaking out all over. Very strange, very unusual. Now the last partial week we have, week 5, August 29th, Mercury will enter Libra. Now I think that legal challenges and high courts, big decisions will be in the news now, so we could hear about important legal cases and developments right around now. So to summarize, you may have noticed there are no major aspects to or by Mars this month, at least when it comes to the visible planets, which is helpful in keeping the temperature down, both in terms of metaphor, but also in terms of actual outside temperature, although I think there will still be plenty of chances to have a standoff, as with the Saturn oppositions early in the month. Like I said, it's a remarkable month in many ways. We go from this very entrenched lack of cooperation to a very collaborative atmosphere in just a few weeks' time, so I think it will feel a bit like whiplash. I think it's important on an emotional level not to get too worried early in the month, even though things seem so hard to make any headway on. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what we saw in late 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn entered Aquarius. It's like the world suddenly changes and you just kind of go, what just happened? I woke up into this completely different reality. All right, my name is Nina Griffin. Please subscribe, and I appreciate you watching.